Zionism, Islam in the West by Kerry, Bolton. The ISIS Strategy. What I wrote in October 2014 in regard to the Islamic State organization was shortly later confirmed by President Obama. His new strategy for confronting the Islamic State calls first for the removal of Assad in Syria in order to allow the moderate Muslim militias to assume power. Here we get to the crux of the matter. ISIS was formed as part of a dialectical strategy of controlled opposition to create instability in hitherto stable and prosperous states where the U.S.-contrived Arab Spring could not work. CNN breaking the news report that President Obama has asked his national security team for another review of the U.S. policy towards Syria after realizing that ISIS may not be defeated without a political transition in Syria and the removal of President Bashar al-Assad. Senior U.S. officials and diplomats tell CNN. The review is a tacit admission that the initial strategy of trying to confront ISIS first in Iraq and then take them on in Syria without also focusing on the removal of Assad was a miscalculation. In just the past week, the White House has convened 4 meetings of the president's national security team, one of which was chaired by President Obama and others, which were attended by principals like the Secretary of State. These meetings, in the words of one senior official, were driven to a large degree by how our Syria strategy fits into our ISIS strategy. Related, Obama's no strategy comment sparks uproar. Quote, "The president has asked us to look again into how this fits together." One senior official said, "The long-running Syria problem is now compounded by the reality that it is genuinely defeat ISIL. We need not only defeat in Iraq, but a defeat in Syria. The U.S. government refers to ISIS as ISIL. U.S. presidents, including Obama, do not have brainwaves of strategy. He had received advice on this, and there is no tacit admission of miscalculation. Indeed, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel had previously drafted a highly private memo on National Security Advisor Susan Rice, calling on the USA to strike at Assad first. Syria, Iraq, and Iran were marked for destruction by Zionist neocon strategists decades ago. No, there was no miscalculation. The strategy was indeed very calculated and of long duration. Like dialectical strategies in general, they must have much time to work through a process. The aim here was to create chaos to justify further U.S. actions against states that are regarded as the primary obstacles to U.S. and or Israeli aims. Like the destruction of Saddam Hussein, Assad happens to be one of the few popular leaders in the region capable and willing to confront Islamic terrorism. We should also add that there's also other European aims, and some of this stuff is becoming multinational. We've gotten into great detail in the last couple, about three chapters here with some of the commentary about how the system itself also exerts its own force, and we're moving towards a kind of globalist and neoliberal system that goes beyond just Israeli or Muslim, U.S. or Chinese interest. But it's this stuff is definitely geared more from the West, these aims that we're critiquing here. However, it is not the type of Islamic terrorism that American and Zionist hegemonists want eliminating. They are the cat's paws of the American and Israeli strategies. We would also put in the British here. This is something that he's really weak on, even though he's mentioned these other elites. But the British elites and also the old European ones, ties to all these Rothschilds, and you also have supposedly at least anti-Zionist like the Soros and the Davos that we talked about in the Islamization of Europe that also want a lot of these same kind of goals here. So it's not just them. We have this World Economic Forum as a front. Well, you could make a point that the World Economic Forum is not the ones that are actually in charge. They're a kind of philosopher class of experts put out there by bigger elites that still those ideas have power. So it's not just America. This isn't some neocon defense of my country that shouldn't be involved in this shit and is completely enmeshed with it and with Israel. So let's continue. The cat's paws of American and Israeli strategists, like the KLA in Kosovo and the moderate Muslim terrorist militias that the USA used to oust and murder Gaddafi in Libya. ISIL and their moderate counterparts in Syria are part of the same strategy to destroy the Assad regime. As the State Department now explains, the actions against ISIL in Iraq were both aimed to allow USA time to train moderate Islamic terrorists to fight both ISIL and Assad in Syria. You see how we keep doing this shit? We fight fire with fire here. We train up terrorists to go fight other terrorists, and they end up being our enemies all the time. And here you can see how much of this is intentional with these dialectical strategies. In October, the U.S. stressed an Iraq-first strategy with efforts to degrade ISIS in Iraq as the priority and the operations in Syria done to shape conditions in Iraq. Washington hoped that would give time for the U.S. to vet, train, and arm a moderate Syrian rebel fighting force to combat ISIS, and ultimately the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. It was part of a package deal. One destroys the dreaded ISIL, while simultaneously destroying the real target of the USA and Israel, Assad's Syria. ISIS/ISIL serves as a mere ploy to get to the real target. The administration has asked Congress for $500 million to train and equip 5,000 vetted rebels within 1 year. There is nothing really sudden about the Obama change in strategy. It has been mooted not only secretly by Hagel, but also in public by Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham in the Wall Street Journal. Our favorite neocons here. Now, at least we have a John McCain Jr. these days called Eye Patch McCain, who's the most highly stocked, loaded conservative there is in Congress. I think he was the most highly paid. He's up there. Eye Patch McCain, Dan Crenshaw. Quote, how can we arm and train 5,000 Syrians and expect them to succeed against Islamic State without protecting them and their families from Assad's airstrikes and barrel bombs? Or expect moderate groups like in Syria fighting Islamic State to take advantage of U.S. airstrikes if we do not coordinate or communicate our operations with them? Our efforts to build up a viable Free Syrian army to liberate Syria from the evils of Islamic State and Mr. Assad will surely fail if the Syrian ruler is not dealt with. McCain stated that the ouster of Assad requires the U.S. to militarily degrade the Assad regime, upgrade the moderate opposition, change the momentum of the conflict, and create conditions for a political solution. McCain states that targeting ISIS with airstrikes provides the USA with the opportunity to also target Syria with airstrikes. At a minimum, this means a larger role for U.S. military advisors and forward air controllers. It also means declaring safe zones in Syria and telling Mr. Assad that if his forces and aircraft operate there, they will be targeted like Islamic State. Key regional partners realize that we must confront Mr. Assad and as well as Islamic State, and they are willing to join America in doing so. It is a strategy that has been played out before. Dialectically, the power elites creates or sponsors the most extreme of oppositions, which allows it to present a more moderate alternative, thereby shifting the center of political gravity. Now, we talked about this in the nihilist dialectic with Father Seraphim Rose, how in the longer game, this is a satanic strategy to get us to incorporate religious syncretism, which I think Kerry Bolton here falls right into. But that is the more moderate take, what's going to be a good worldly religion to solve our problems. The Antichrist can make peace. But I want to focus a little more on the political, because I'm a layperson. I leave more of this stuff. I like to talk about where this stuff meets up with the politics. And if we look at this, Tavistock uses strategies like this too to cause maladaptive responses, and these people are philosophically and metaphysically dialecticians as well, and any immanentized type of ideas, whether you have a empiricist epistemology, will inevitably be dialectical. And then so will your religious phenomenology when that bottoms out and you end up in vitalism, or you try to have intellectual ideas getting into religious phenomenology that you can get some kind of reporting or measure on, and that we all have if you don't use hesychasm and try to reject the imagination and only you keep it in its proper place for art, then you'll have these archetypal patterns that are part of reality, but they'll become part of your religion, and then you end up in opposites. You inevitably end up in opposites, or trying to come up with a false immanentized trinity to deal with that. Dyer's video, Alchemy and the Science of Dialectical Manipulation with James Lindsay, is excellent on explicating this and how it ends up going on in history. Very good. This is the difference where Eastern Orthodoxy is actually non-dialectical with the essence's energy distinction. It's above that. You see people try to misuse that for politics, like R.J. Rushdoony. He tries to Americanize religion and make it all about freedom. And it's a mistake. So that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm talking at the political level that's a little bit below that, but nested in that. But he gets great insights on what is wrong in America and this one and the many problem that goes back and forth dialectically, and how the Trinity, he kind of sees how the Trinity is above that, but he tries to force it into politics and bad Protestant hermeneutics that take him into some pretty messed up places in his personal life. He marries his own daughter out of sola scriptura, so we would reject and refute him, but he sees the problem in America very well. With these dialectics, though, too, if this ends up in your theory, and you're also corrupt people in charge who've studied psychology and used divide and conquer forever. They've used it since the East India Trading Company. Julius Caesar used this tactic. I mean, they've got it down to a science, and they actually have places like Tavistock that force dialectics into the populace. We use this as a political strategy. So it starts to reflect itself and reverberate in this type of pattern in these tactics that they use. And they in the book on Tavistock, you have their papers where they talk about doing future shocks and forcing you into these cognitive dissonances that freeze you up by inverting things and having two opposite problems where you don't know what to do. The leftists who were dialecticians talk about causing people to continue to fight instead of allowing people to get better equal rights so the dialectic can continue. So this strategy they're using to put over here with the extremists and then offering a more moderate synthesis. Well, you see, they've also been funding this radical feminism. We saw that rise up. That was completely Western sponsored. That came out of nowhere with the feminists that were running around, even though you would get killed for it in Iran. It was obviously CIA backed, and you see that they sent SLAYER over there. Did you know that? Let's take a look at that.
SLAYER spray painted on a wall in Iran, and they took a picture standing next to it so they could, so to identify that they were there, and that this was there, and this is Iran. And I just kind of looked at that, and I thought, wow, SLAYER in a Muslim country. And then I said, well, we have to go to Iran.
So if you look here, I mean, this is pretty insane that SLAYER's playing like this in Iran while they're in the middle of a revolution with a dictator, right? And we've seen the CIA has used culture creation and anthropology that Jay Dyer has gone into great detail in. And punk rock was something that they also helped to create as well to change the culture in America. They've used culture creation in this manner as a weapon. So now we're not even at, this happens in tandem with the overseas in these countries. We had these feminist revolutions, and these feminist revolutions didn't even have the suffragette phase. They went straight to woke, crazy feminist women running around with their tits out and marker all over themselves, full woke. Some of these people we're about to see will have anti-Trump signs, even though Trump isn't the one backing these dictators in Iran. So this isn't Syria, but Syria and Iran are both enemies of ours. We export punk rock music to Russia. We exported homosexuality around. Like the speed with which this is spreading now is crazy. And let's take a look too and watch these men up front and these wars that we saw everywhere since the French Revolution, not just America, but the way this has been going if we look at the bigger picture. It's all about freedom as the highest ideal and destruction of tradition.
This next song I want to dedicate to people that who live and die for freedom. Yeah, there's a lot of people. Are you free? Do you really think you're free?
Take a look at these guys here who are up front that look like important men who are probably a little more traditional. They don't look like they're happy here. They don't look like they want to be sitting here watching a fucking SLAYER concert, right? They don't seem to like it. They've probably been made to if they want to get funding for their armies and for their fighting.
What I thought. Are you willing to die for freedom? Are you willing to die so others can be free? Okay. Well, there's to die so others can be free.
Is Trump the biggest problem in Iran for the people that want to fight the Iranian government that are being sponsored by the U.S. at this point in time? This is ludicrous. This is these dialectics that they're playing. So not only do you have these dialectics Kerry Bolton was talking about in the Middle East, that Jay Dyer has also gone into from another angle. And I have some pushback on Kerry Bolton. In my readings of his book, I've partly read it to push back on some of his extreme fascist positions and pro-Islam, but these dialectics are a tactic. So they've backed people like ISIS, who are hardcore militants, who would kill these feminists and these people who want to have Slayer concerts. And then at the same time, we back the opposite position with people who are much more radical. The Trump side. They got this is the they got ITDS, the Islamic State Trump derangement syndrome here. I mean, what the fuck is this?
Well, this song is for them. This is mandatory suicide.
Mandatory suicide. This is a song. This song's like based on Full Metal Jacket and Saving Private Ryan and Storming the Beach, about sending people to war. So like, you could see the way our own culture has been influenced kind of by the militarism and the Bloods and the Crips coming out of Vietnam as a new type of way for this kind of masculinity crisis and intimacy crisis and crisis of religion, the nihilist dialectic Father Seraphim Rose talks about. But you see where this kind of goes from being like the protest rock music of the 60s, and now we're going full metal. You got fucking Slayer here, you know, like singing a mandatory suicide about being sent to the front lines to die before the horror movie riffs come in. So the obvious, psyop that's going on there, the use of culture creation. We've seen other people go. Now we've seen artists go do this for Israel recently. We've seen people doing this with the Toby Keith bullshit after 9/11. We'll put a boot in your ass. It's the American way. So we've seen this over and over again. Pre-operant conditioning too. It seems like they're putting a lot of propaganda out there right now in our current music, and then drawing from previous types of music. We got into this in the Martin Luther King chapter. We got very into detail how this stuff was used to spread wokeness around as a weapon. So I think one thing, even though I've been giving Kerry Bolton some pushback here, I do think he's very correct to address these dialectical issues. And now I'm going to put this out there and we'll get on to the final chapter.